Okay, this is the fifth part in our series on the existence of God. We're going to go ahead and wrap up this series right here in this presentation. In the last presentation, we talked about design arguments, and we will go ahead and wrap it up here with some more about design arguments. We will go ahead and talk about religious experience, pragmatic arguments, and also the issue with abduction or inference, the best explanation. Now, remember we said with design arguments that we talked about how we're talking about whether nature has a purpose to it or whether it is purposeless. And number one, historically, many people, including scientists, have always believed several aspects of nature was deliberately planned, designed, or directed. That can be referring to some things that are seen in the human body, or whether the universe itself, or whether planet Earth, or some aspect of the natural world. And design arguments are also known as teleological arguments, which means basically some aspects of the natural world have a goal or purpose to them, an end goal or purpose to them. Now, we talked last time a little bit about the fine-tuning of the universe argument, and we talked about how in the last 50 years, scientists have discovered that the universe is analogous to a biosphere. Its basic structure must be precisely set for life to exist. We talked about some of the scientists who accept the claim that our universe is fine-tuned for life, included this list here. Some of these people obviously are not Christian theists. Some of them don't believe in God. And so the issue is not so much whether the universe is fine-tuned, the issue is what explains the fine-tuning. So we can wrap it up here with a syllogism. The universe possesses finely tuned physical constants and initial conditions that allow intelligent life to exist. This is either due to necessity, did it have to be this way, by chance, maybe it just happened this way by chance or design. The universe was planned out by a mind. Third, it was not due to necessity or chance. Therefore, we conclude that the fine-tuning of the universe is the work of an intelligent agent. Now, let me go ahead and give some quotes here because I want to point out something. Now, Paul Davies, once again, he is not a Christian. He's an agnostic or some sort of deist. He's a physicist. He's written many books on the relationship between science and religion. You can look him up on Amazon. He says here, the laws of physics seem to be the product of exceedingly ingenious design, and the universe must have a purpose. Roger Penrose is a mathematician author, said, I would say the universe has a purpose. It's not there just somehow by chance. And then we had the Nobel Prize winner in physics, Arno Penzias. He says, astronomy leads to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the conditions required to permit life, and one that has an underlying, might say, supernatural plan. And then we had the famous comment by Fred Hoyle, who is a British astrophysicist, who said a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The number one calculates from the facts seem to be so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. Now, I'm not trying to cherry pick quotes here, but I just want to point out something. So when they say the universe has a purpose, what they're talking about here is in this issue of causation. If you go down the list here, different kinds of causation, which was talked about in Aristotle's work. If you look down here, what's called the final cause in the middle, it says the purpose for which something is made. All these authors here are talking about the universe seems to have a final cause. That means it seems to have an end goal. Now, in science today, modern science, they do not talk much about final causation. It is not used much in modern science anymore. And if it is, it doesn't refer to any kind of God or deity or designer or anything. So we need to realize science is a study of causes. Also, there's a lot of controversy over the efficient cause here. Like, what was the cause of something to be made, whether there is an agent behind it or something. So probably the most debated issues today are over final causation and efficient causation, but let's just remember these different kinds of causes and remember how they play a role in this entire debate about design arguments. Now, remember also we have the multi-universe theory that people throw out a lot, like maybe there's other universes out there. Remember, this is purely speculative. We don't have any hard evidence about this issue. Obviously, if there were multiple universes, that would multiply the need for a creator because each one would need creation to get started. We could also ask who or what is keeping these universes from colliding. And once again, multiple universes makes it much more complicated. It's easier to posit one universe with one cause versus many universes with an unknown cause. And obviously, this is an atheist admission of evidence for design, and the design is detectable. So let's go ahead and move on now to another argument, and that is called the information theory argument. This is another design argument that's been talked about a lot over the last 15 to 20 years. And in this argument, we're talking about the DNA issue. Of course, DNA is what carries all the genetic information for all complex organisms. DNA contains encoded information, which allows it to regulate and pass on traits. Now, I don't want to pretend that I can go into great detail about this topic. I'm not going to break it down in hundreds of slides, but if you want to read more about this, get Stephen Meyer's book called Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt. And I just want to say that he has also responded to criticisms of his books in these books right here, Debating Darwin's Doubt and Signature of Controversy, responding to critics of Signature in the Cell. So before you jump to all kinds of counter objections to this issue, make sure you read both sides of the argument. He has responded to his critics, and I think that's very important. So make sure you know all the issues before you just read something online and think it's a closed case, like we've got it all figured out. Now it comes to genetic information. Remember, information has 4 attributes: syntax, meaning, action, and purpose. It seems that all living DNA information contains all 4 of these attributes. And the 4 letters that comprise the DNA encodes the information to alphabetic or digital form. Remember, a living cell needs not just any DNA, but DNA that encodes functional proteins. And to be functional, a protein must have a very specific sequence. As Francis Crick once said, for any particular protein, the amino acids must be joined up in the right order. So proteins, and thus the DNA that encodes them, are both complex and specified. So let me give an illustration here. Let's use an analogy. So let's say you're going to build a house. And in order to build a house, you obviously need a blueprint. And that means you need a specific written set of instructions, as well as you need the physical materials of a certain size, composition, lumber, nails, cement, wires, etc. But the point is, before you go to build that house and gather your materials, you need the blueprint. And the blueprint to build that house came from a mind. And before that mind drew up that blueprint, the information formed in the mind of that architect. Similar illustration is given when you go to buy a computer. It comes with a written set of instructions on how to use the computer. That computer programmer had to come up with those instructions in his mind. That means the information started in his mind before it was written down in a physical set of instructions on paper. And then it went to you on how to use your computer. So let's use the illustration with DNA. So in order to build a living thing, there needs to be a specific written set of instructions, which is the DNA, as well as the physical materials of a certain size and composition, which must be formed into precise structures, cells, tissues, organs, etc. That's called epigenetic information. So the point is that the DNA is your instruction manual, just like the instruction manuals needed to build the house. So once again, if we use that analogy, remember that the instruction manual, the DNA, has to have the biological information in it to begin with, but that information had to have come from a mind to begin with. It had to start in a mind, and then it was put into that instruction manual, which is your DNA. Now, as I said, Stephen Meyer goes into great detail about this in his books, and he responds to critics. So please make sure you do your homework on this topic. Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, said DNA is like a software program, only much more complex than anything we've devised. And Richard Dawkins said that the genetic code is truly digital, in exactly the same sense as computer codes. Now, one thing that came up as an objection to this issue was junk DNA, and that was an argument for bad design. And they said about 40 years ago that 90% of our DNA does not encode proteins, and the non-protein coding portion was labeled as junk. And they attribute it to molecular accidents that had accumulated in the course of evolution. So supposedly junk DNA was evidence against design, since an intelligent designer would presumably not have filled our genome with so much garbage. But as Jonathan Wells talks about here in The Myth of Junk DNA and elsewhere, we've seen it not only in Wells' work, but just in science. They found out that this junk DNA ended up being functional because genomic evidence shows that much of our non-protein coded DNA performs essential biological functions. So they once thought this issue was a slam dunk argument against design, and they found out that that junk DNA turned out to be useful. So that's something that we don't want to throw out there anymore, that we have all this junk DNA. Another argument against design is called bad design, as I just talked about a little bit, because people think we need to have suboptimal design. If we don't have suboptimal designs, it means there's no designer at all. And obviously, you know, your car isn't designed optimally, that's still designed, and many things that you see around you are not designed optimally. They're not perfectly designed. And as we know, we have trade-offs in design. Laptop computers must strike a balance between size, weight, and performance. Larger cars may be more safe and comfortable, but they also have more difficult maneuvering ability, and they consume more fuel. High ceilings make rooms more dramatic, but they also consume more energy. We could go through a whole list of things in reality that are design, and we will see design trade-offs. Now, obviously, if you want to appeal to theological issues, the fall of man played a large role in why so many things appear to have bad design. I mean, there's all kinds of flaws in the human body, as we know about, but it doesn't mean there's no design to it at all, or there's no designer. Same with the planet, same with planet Earth or the universe as well. So just remember these issues when you talk about bad design. Now, obviously, we talked a little bit about in one of our previous presentations about the God of the Gaps argument. A lot of people think this is a slam dunk, that science keeps looking for naturalistic answers, and we once believed lightning was attributed to the gods. You know, then we found out, of course, that lightning could be attributed to nature itself, or you know, we looked for lightning. And well, anyway, the point is that if you read the Meyer books or some of these other books that have been written on intelligent design, which I talked about in the last presentation, they've given more than enough responses to the rigorous model that they use, and they are not using a God of the gaps model. And remember, the science is a study of naturalistic or materialistic explanations. So no matter what evidence is given for intelligent causation, science will always stick with naturalistic or materialistic explanations. So we talked about this in a previous presentation in this series. Remember, also science answers the how questions. It talks about how the mechanisms work. They study the mechanisms. We talked a little bit about the difference between scientific and personal explanations. Science deals with impersonal explanations. It deals with impersonal objects and laws of nature. And in science, we observe and measure how some events regularly follow others. Then we talked about the why questions, which involve personal agent explanations. And this is where science sometimes cannot really answer these questions about whether there's any kind of deeper purpose or design or end goal or teleology or final causation within science. That has to do with personal explanation. So let's make sure that we understand the difference between various explanations and we don't just stick to one, which is non-personal or impersonal explanations to reality. Now, in the recent book, Theistic Evolution, which just came out towards the end of last year, sometimes people will say that God front-loaded everything at the beginning of the universe. And then, of course, that this is happening in initial creation. So later on, various molecules meet at just the right place and time to form the first cell. So that means maybe God front-loaded the initial conditions in the universe and set the times and the cosmic rays and everything just to work out right. That would cause genetic mutations to lead to higher life forms, and that accounts for all the complexity of life. Well, you're going to have to get hold of that book and talk about where it talks about all the issues with that, and I believe that that has some problems because it turns out to be more of a deistic model than anything theistic, but you'll have to get that book and read about it. It goes about it. It talks about these things in great detail. Now let's go ahead and wrap up with a few other issues here. Now, obviously, I think we know that many people who claim there is a God don't need any argumentation or evidence, and they sometimes scorn anyone that comes up with arguments or evidence because they say that that God's existence has little to do with arguments. In other words, people claim belief in God is based on a private religious experience. We know that many Christians say that they know God is real, they know Jesus is the Son of God, or they know what they believe is real by the work of the Holy Spirit, because there are passages that talk about that in the New Testament, no doubt about it, and that's true. So we receive the assurance of the truthfulness of our faith through the work of the Holy Spirit. Why that's true, number 3 here, remember people from other faiths have personal revelations and experiences as well. Thus, people have contradictory religious experiences as seem quite real. If you've ever talked to a Mormon, they claim the Holy Spirit confirms their faith as true by a burning in the bosom, which is considered to be a confirmatory personal experience. And they'll tell you to read the Book of Mormon as well, and you will have the same experience if you're open to it. So 4, remember, while religious experience is important, all experience must be grounded by truth and knowledge. And as I say here in a booklet that we're writing, religious experience does not negate the need for having other good reasons for one's faith. So when Christians come along and say this is all we need as religious experience, they're really ignoring the fact that many people have not had the same experience, and even if they did, they could end up becoming a Mormon or something else. So we want to combine our religious experience with other good reasons for God's existence. And then, of course, there's a pragmatic benefit argument, or pragmatism, and this is very popular as well today. This was seen in the work of William James and Richard Rorty, where the idea that if theological ideas prove to have value for concrete life, they will be true, which basically means if something works, it must be true. If you try these beliefs out and test them in the reality of life, that means they could be true. And obviously, we believe if you have the true path or the true faith, then it should make a radical difference in the reality of life. So there's some truth to this, that religious belief or spiritual belief has a pragmatic element. Definitely, it should make a difference in your life, no doubt about it. However, once again, we have other people from other religious backgrounds who can say the same thing. If someone follows Islam, Mormonism, or Buddhism, and they say they follow it or believe it because it makes a difference in their life, now we have a standoff on who has the true faith. And so the lesson here is the practical difference or belief that it makes in one's life should be one aspect of our overall cumulative case for what we believe. So you can use that as an argument, but that's definitely going to not be enough in today's culture. So if you want to say, you know, your faith is true because it works out in your life, well, that can be okay. But like I said, you may have a Muslim come up to you and say the same thing. They tried Islam and it works for them, but we know Islam isn't based on a true revelation. So let's remember that as we talk about pragmatic benefit. And then finally, we deal with Alvin Plantinga's properly basic belief. If you're not familiar with Alvin Plantinga, he is a well-known Christian philosopher that has written tons of books and has certainly contributed a lot to the topic. So he really took issue with what's called classical foundationalism, which believes classical foundationalism said that in order for belief to be basic, it needs to be self-evident, incorrigible, or evident to the senses, or non-basic, in which a belief needs to be based on deduction, induction, or abduction. Plantinga didn't abandon all foundationalism, but he modified it. And he said, why can't belief in God just be properly basic? So he tries to help out with people that need this strict evidential requirement to believe in God. He tries to provide another model. And so number 3 here, he says, if people believe without evidence in other minds, or that our past goes back more than 5 minutes, or we had lunch 5 minutes ago and we can't prove that, then why can't Christians believe in God on the same basis? So he relies heavily on Calvin's sensus divinitus, which says basically that all humans have an awareness of God through nature and conscience. And so this is talked about in the book Theology's Epistemological Dilemma. You can get that book and read it. I've read it. And he'll talk about whether Plantinga's arguments work or not. There's been a lot of controversy over this issue, of course. Plantinga goes on to say humans are born with a capacity that can trigger an awareness of God. And of course, whatever makes this awareness evident to people may vary from person to person. He thinks that people's encounter with the world can provide an immediate awareness of God. For example, if two people are hiking on a mountain encountering the world of nature, they may say, hey, there must be a God, right? It's just so obvious. And so he says this is more of an intuition, not an inference or reasoning process. It's just an immediate intuition to say they know there's a God. It's something to say where you just say, I just know. And so this intuition of the awareness of God is a result of the work of the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit brings that into reality in different situations with people. And that is why Plantinga says it's a very basic belief, it's self-awareness, and this is not a conclusion from other beliefs. So I would say that properly basic beliefs are not terrible, but once again, I think you need to combine it with other arguments for God's existence. So you can't use that as the only thing. So these are some of the different ways people approach the existence of God. And in this series, I hope this has given you enough things to work on and think about as you talk to people in our culture about God's existence. Remember to review each clip and think diligently and look at the resources we left to read about this issue. Have a good day.